seen some talk lately about Steve Young and the fact that if he played in today's era, he would be the greatest quarterback of all time. I disagree. The correct answer to that is Joe Montana. Montana and Young played together with the 49ers for a long time. And if you look at when they played, their eras were pretty much the same. There was only a few years that separated Montana entering the league and Young leaving BYU and going to the LA Express and then eventually to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And there was only a few years at the end of their careers that separated as well. In fact, for the most part, they played at the same time. And if you look at the two quarterbacks, this isn't a knock on Steve Young. He's in the Hall of Fame. He's one of the best quarterbacks of his era. He just wasn't as good as Joe Montana. Montana had 4 Super Bowl wins, 2 of those coming without Jerry Rice, without all those guys that are around him at that time, especially Jerry Rice. The first 2, those 49er teams weren't quite the same. But that era, the 80s, mid-90s, that Steve Young dominated, is the same era that Joe Montana dominated. And actually, you could say that Joe Montana in the early 80s had it tougher than Steve Young. And part of the argument for Steve Young is that because of the concussions that he sustained, his career was shortened and he wouldn't be able to go on and play out the full string. And so that held him back a little bit. Well, it's the same thing for Joe Montana. In fact, Steve Young isn't a 49er if Joe Montana doesn't have a back injury due to all the hits that he sustained early on in his career. That's really what ended up bringing Steve Young to the 49ers, was Montana having back surgery in 1986. Although he recovered, Bill Walsh didn't think he was ever going to be the same mobile athlete that he was. That's something that Walsh wanted his quarterbacks to have. He saw it in Steve Young, brought him in. And despite Bill Walsh's best efforts to move Joe Montana out in favor of Steve Young, it didn't happen. In fact, although the 49ers kind of floundered at the beginning in 87 with Young and Montana battling it out, and then early on in 88, once Bill Walsh made the decision that he was going to ride with Joe Montana, 49ers ended up going from 6-5 to 10-6, winning the NFC West, winning the Super Bowl. And that was the end of the line for Bill Walsh, who would retire after that season. Montana would go on to win another Super Bowl. Then he'd win an MVP before an injury knocked him out, and is actually what put Steve Young into the starting lineup with the 49ers in 1991. But again, Montana, Young, 2 terrific quarterbacks, but just Montana was different. You look at the way that Montana played, and this is a guy who had the ability to go toe-to-toe with the best quarterbacks of his era. You know, the best example, probably the 1984 Super Bowl against the Miami Dolphins. Dan Marino and that aerial attack. Montana blew him away that day. Not only did he do a tremendous job through the air, but in that game, Montana ran for a touchdown and finished as the 49ers' second leading rusher, despite only having 5 rushing attempts. Montana always did things well with his feet, was one of the best quarterbacks of all time in throwing on the move. Examples galore of that. So when it comes to Montana and Young, the nod goes to Montana. Plus, Montana played against extremely difficult competition. Yes, during Steve Young's era, you had the Dallas Cowboys. That's kind of what knocked him out of maybe winning a Super Bowl or 2 more. But Joe Montana had the New York Giants, and the New York Giants were led by Bill Parcells and Bill Belichick. Talk about a tremendous defensive coaching duo. That New York Giants team was a ferocious team that the 49ers struggled with during the Bill Walsh era, especially in the later part of the 80s, mid to late 80s. On top of that, you had the Washington team led by Joe Gibbs, which was a very strong unit at that time. You also had the Chicago Bears. The Bears in 1984 were getting ready to become the team that was going to go 15-1 the next season. The 49ers beat them in the NFC Championship game the year before, 23-0. Then at the end of the 88 season, they'd go into Chicago again and knock off the Bears to go to another Super Bowl. So the overall competition that Joe Montana faced in the NFC back in the 80s was much stiffer than what Steve Young had during his run with the 49ers. But I want to make sure that this is clear. Steve Young was a great quarterback. That's why he's in the NFL Hall of Fame. He did tremendous things for the 49ers. Was a guy, I was always more of a Joe Montana fan. I grew up during that era. Young was the guy that never could get over the hump until he did in 1994. And again, he's not, you can't say that Steve Young isn't a great quarterback. He's just not the best. He just isn't the greatest of all time. And like I said in the beginning of this, Montana and Young played at the same time, and Montana was the better quarterback then. He'd be the better quarterback now. Now, in terms of the 49ers present, things are going to start getting busy with them. The free agency period is starting to ramp down. Tomorrow will be the beginning of the draft process in terms of having the local pro day in Santa Clara. And then next Monday, April 17th, is the beginning of the offseason program. Now, that isn't the OTA period, but that's when they get to come in to Santa Clara, start working out together. Then you have the draft at the end of April, April 28th to 30th. Following the draft will be the rookie minicamp. That rookie minicamp is anywhere to 1 to 2 weeks after the draft. That'll be our first glimpse at all the rookies that the 49ers select. There'll be some undrafted free agents in there as well. So that'll be a fun time to be able to finally see them on the field. And that really starts their on-field off-season program, because the May 22nd, you'll see the 49ers on the field for OTAs. Then the following week of the 30th will be week 2. And then the final week of OTAs is going to be June 5th. And then that all follows up with the mandatory minicamp the week of June 13th to 15th. Interesting dates to pay attention to here is Brock Purdy. John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan talked about the next update for Purdy coming 12 weeks post-surgery. That's going to be right around June 2nd. So that third week of OTAs, maybe around that period, we should have an update on where Brock Purdy's status is and kind of where the 49ers think he's going to be in terms of being able to return. So some key dates there. Along the way, we'll get the schedule will be released. That's going to be coming out somewhere around mid-May. 49ers possibly could go to have a couple of games in the international slate. They do play the Jacksonville Jaguars on the road. Jacksonville is slated to play in London once again. So that could be a 49ers game there out in London. But we'll see. But this interesting now, because we're going to be getting into that busy point of the offseason. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll get to see them on the field, see Sam Darnold, how he's throwing. We'll get to see a lot more of Trey Lance. We've seen a few throws of his, but being able to actually see him get that field work is going to be interesting. So keep it locked in here to Inside the 49ers with Jack Hammer. We'll be bringing all that information to you, along with some live video of all those practices as well. So keep it locked in here. Hit that like button for me. Hit subscribe. When we hit subscribe, also hit that little bell notification so you don't miss anything as we go live. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great day. Keep it locked in here. Take care, and we'll talk with you soon.